Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to talk about something that hits your wallet every single day: inflation. We're going to pull back the curtain on it, breaking down exactly how India's Consumer Price Index, or CPI, is put together and what it's really telling us about the cost of living. So, here's the game plan. We'll start with the basics. What even is the CPI? Then we'll get into the simple math behind that big inflation number you always hear about. After that, we'll dive into India's latest figures, peel back the layers to find the hidden stories, and we'll wrap up by talking about why this one little number has such a massive impact on the entire economy. You know that feeling, right? When you're sure your money just doesn't go as far as it used to? Well, that feeling is exactly what economists are trying to measure. And their number one tool for doing that is the Consumer Price Index, or, as you'll usually hear it, the CPI. All right, let's get right into it. The absolute easiest way to wrap your head around the CPI is to picture a giant national shopping cart. So picture this cart. It's not just random stuff. It's packed with a very specific fixed basket of goods that represents what a typical household spends its money on. We're talking everything from your groceries and clothes to rent, fuel for your car, and even things like school fees. The CPI basically just keeps a running tab on the total price of this whole basket as it changes over time. Now, here's the really important part. Not everything in that cart is treated equally. Each category gets a weight depending on how much of the average family's budget it takes up. And look at this. In India, food and beverages make up nearly 40% of the entire index. That is huge. What it means is that a jump in food prices is going to have a much, much bigger impact on the final inflation number than, say, a change in the price of shoes. And there you have it. The CPI, in a nutshell, is just one single number that captures the changing cost of that whole national shopping cart. It gives us a snapshot of the price pressures that families, real people, are actually dealing with. Okay, so we have this index number, but how does that turn into the big headline inflation rate we all see on the news? Let's walk through the calculation. It's probably simpler than you think. So the inflation rate you hear about most often is the year-on-year one. And it's really just a simple percentage change. You take the CPI for this month, you subtract the CPI from the exact same month last year, then you divide it result by last year's number, and finally, multiply by 100 to get your percentage. All right, theory's great, but let's plug in some real numbers from India to see this in action. The CPI for June 2025 was 194.2. A year before that, in June 2024, it was 190.2. So we subtract them, that's a difference of 4. We divide that 4 by the starting value, 190.2, and then multiply by 100. So what do we get? And boom, there's our number, 2.10%. That's it. That is the headline inflation rate. All it's telling us is that our national shopping cart cost about 2% more in June of 2025 than it did a year earlier. Okay, so we know where the number comes from, but what is it actually telling us about the economy right now? Well, the latest data points to a really clear story. Price growth is slowing down. Yeah, take a look at this chart. It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? Just 1 year ago, inflation was running hot at over 5%. Today, it's dropped all the way to 2.10%. That is a major, major slowdown. Now, it doesn't mean prices are falling, they're still going up, but the speed of that increase has hit the brakes hard. And this table here, it really lays out that steady downward trend for us. You can see the CPI index number itself keeps climbing from 190.2 up to 194.2, so prices are definitely still rising. But look at the inflation percentage next to it. It's been consistently dropping. But hold on, that 2.10% number, it's just an average. And like any average, it can totally hide what's really going on under the surface. To get the full picture, you have to break the data down. For starters, inflation isn't the same for everyone. The data shows that price increases in the cities at 2.56% were quite a bit faster than in rural areas, which saw just 1.72%. So right away, we know that people living in cities are feeling the squeeze from rising costs a little more intensely. So you've got to be asking, what's behind this huge slowdown? Well, it pretty much all comes down to one thing: food. The Consumer Food Price Index, which is just the food part of our shopping cart, came in at negative 1.06%. That's right, negative. That's not just slower inflation, that's deflation. It means that, on average, food actually got cheaper over the year, and that one fact is pulling the entire headline number down. And this is where the real story is. This contrast is everything. While your grocery bill might have felt a bit better, other essential costs were climbing and climbing fast. Take education, for example. It jumped by over 5.5%. This is a perfect illustration of how that low headline number can mask the real pressure on family budgets, where a little bit of relief in one area is getting wiped out by added stress somewhere else. So why all the fuss? Why do governments and central banks spend so much time calculating and picking apart this one number? Well, because it's not just some interesting piece of data. It's a huge driver of policy that directly affects your money. Well, listen to what the big players, the IMF, the OECD, have to say about it. The CPI is a key statistic for making monetary policy. Central banks, like the Reserve Bank of India, are watching this number like a hawk when they decide on interest rates. If inflation is high, they'll likely raise rates, making your loans and mortgages more expensive. But low inflation, like what we're seeing now, gives them room to potentially cut rates to give the economy a boost. All right, let's quickly recap what we've covered. The big takeaways here are: 1. The CPI is basically the cost of a national shopping cart. 2. Inflation is just the percent change in that cost from one year to the next. 3. India's main inflation rate has slowed way down, and that's mostly because food prices actually fell. And 4, and this is so important, that single headline number is always hiding different stories for different people and different products. So from now on, when you see that headline inflation number, you're not just going to see a random statistic. You're going to see a whole story just waiting to be unpacked. You can ask the right questions. What's really driving this? Who's feeling it the most? Because understanding the story behind the number, well, that's the first step to really understanding the economy that shapes your life.